211th Contact. Monday, August 18, 1986, 3:01 a.m. Billy says, yesterday, we talked about the fact that the 8 agencies, which operate the aircraft here on Earth, are actually profit gangster organizations because they only provide their so-called assistance for a fee, whereby they put aside a large portion of the cash donations for their own machinations, such as for compensation, etc. What do you think of this, and do you also have 8 agencies for people in need of assistance? Quetzal says, such 8 agencies do exist with us, however, not in relation to our own people but rather in the context of the assistance that we provide for other peoples who belong to our federation, respectively, who are cared for by our federation, because they still live in lower levels of development and are not yet in a position to bring themselves to a state of their own assistance. Billy says, interesting, but this doesn't contradict your directives, which state that you may not interfere in the affairs of foreign worlds and peoples, who aren't yet developed far enough to be able to master space flight? Quetzal says, concerning the peoples, to whom we can provide assistance, on the one hand, it concerns those who are arranged into our federation for the purpose of protection, and on the other hand, the fact applies that they know very much about spaceflight technology and, thus, also about the existence of other civilizations on other planets, and they also stand in connection with these. However, they are not yet in a position to manage their own affairs in such a way that they would not have to suffer any need. Billy says, aha, now I understand. But how do you handle the matters around these 8 agencies? Are profits also made there, and are relief goods, etc., set aside as compensation for giving assistance, as this is the case with the earthly 8 agencies? By the way, I find this to be extremely infamous because I am of the view that assistance should never be handled in any way that involves repayment and profit. In my opinion, an 8 agency should consist of people who should not provide assistance in order to be repaid but who should provide it voluntarily in their leisure time and, thus, without compensation. Quetzal says, that is also correct. What exists on the earth in the so-called 8 agencies must honestly be described as profiteering and as deceiving the donors of the relief goods because, especially with respect to the monetary contributions, respectively the cash donations, a large percentage is set aside for the machinations and the compensations of those members of the organization who do not provide their assistance voluntarily but only for a respectable compensation. All such activity is absolutely unacceptable with us because all are helpers of all 8 agencies, which operate both privately as well as for the whole population, work free of charge, and use their leisure time for this. But on Earth, this is not the case because in truth, a large percentage of the donations, especially the cash donations, is set aside as a machination and for remuneration, which, in our view, represents an evil theft of the donated goods and against those in need of assistance. Billy says, I think so, too. And when I think of the horrendous compensations of the bosses, etc., of the 8 agencies, it makes me sick because of such immense nastiness. Quetzal says, assistance for fellow human beings, nature, and all its life forms, not just people, are in need of assistance should never be a profit business of any kind. Rather, any assistance must be voluntary and of a gratuitous nature, no matter how materialistic a person or an entire humanity is. But what is being done to the contrary by the earthly 8 agencies is criminal and deceitful. Billy says, your word in the ear of the criminals and the fraudsters. To my knowledge, it is legally permitted that the so-called 8 agencies, which are, in truth, actually profit organizations, may collect about 40% of the donations as machinations and as compensations. Quetzal says, as explained, That corresponds to criminal and deceitful actions because real assistance, in any case, can always only be done gratuitously and through leisure employment. It is different in the case when a nation or state, through a national decision, makes state goods available for providing assistance and is responsible for the machinations and compensations, etc. Billy says, "Thank you." Then something else. "Yesterday, there was a man here, who talked constantly, whereby we hardly got a chance to speak. He spoke very much, but in truth, he hardly stated anything. What do you think of such people, or what is your people's teaching in this connection?" Quetzal says, "There are people, both women and men alike, who are unusually happy to hear themselves speak, which is why they talk very long-windedly if they state anything. They talk very much because on the one hand, they are unable to control themselves, and on the other hand, because they appear to be greater than they really are. Thus, they mistakenly believe that their long speeches would explain important things in detail, although they are nothing more than empty burdens that get on the listener's nerves, as you tend to say. Such people, whom we designate as pointless speakers, also believe themselves to be elevated people and consciously or unconsciously try to show off to others, whereby they also consider themselves as very intelligent, but this, in reality, actually speaks contrary to the intelligence that they possess. Pointless speakers or extensive talkers, as we also call them, suffer from a peculiar inferiority syndrome, which they themselves do not recognize, and they try to make up for this, nevertheless, with their senseless, extensive talking, by what means they strain the nerves of their fellow human beings." Billy says, "And does this occur with you frequently?" Quetzal says, "No, because these issues were resolved and corrected with us very early on, consequently, they no longer appear." Billy says, "But here on earth, one still encounters many people who are sick in this hospital." Quetzal says, "I don't understand your words entirely." Billy says, "Here, it is said that someone is sick in a certain hospital if something isn't right but is just wrong or morbid." Quetzal says, "Ah, I understand." Billy says, "Since we were already at it, even if I get myself into trouble with the male world, throughout the time of my life, I've made the determination again and again that, generally speaking, the intelligence of the female gender is dominant to the male. I would like to describe the female achievements of intelligence as nearly extraordinary, when I combine everything in terms of the overall intelligence of Earth humanity, and particularly the male world. Of course, it should be noted that there are always great geniuses among men. While there is hardly any mention of this on the female side, however, I think that this must not obscure the fact that the truly great intelligence actually lies with the female gender, but this is suppressed and disparaged by the male world because it estimates itself to be better, greater, and more intelligent than it is in truth. This led me to the thought that the actual and true mass of intelligence must actually lie with the female gender, from where it becomes transferred to the male gender, wherewith I mean an inheritance, through which the intelligence of the mother becomes transferred to the child, so also to the male offspring. And since this has to be, the reason for the oppression of the woman, perhaps, lies with the man, as it is customary here on our earth, in that the man, in his arrogance, cannot accept the fact that the female gender is now just once blessed with more intelligence. Perhaps it may be that through this, the male world has succumbed to a phobia and is just afraid of the fact that the female gender could take over the rule. But surely, there are still many other logical reasons on the part of the male world for the oppression and unequal rights of women.